Good day, everybody. Welcome to Rocky Mountain Readings, where the last couple of weeks we've been into profound classic work by the RAMBAM, The Guide for the Perplexed. And for those of you that don't know, the RAMBAM, Moses Maimonides, was one of the foremost intellectuals of medieval Judaism. He became physician to the Sultan Saladin right up till about 1193. The famous Islamic military leader, and he's considered to be one of the foremost authors in all of Judaism. And the book that we're reading is written over 830 years ago. The Guide for the Perplexed. You can get a free copy and follow along. I've given links on the chat rooms to this page, and they have it in three formats: PDF, HTML, and Kindle. We are reading from the Kindle edition, and yesterday he broke into 12 propositions that the Muslims held to and described. Now, these were propositions that had to do with physics and their understanding, and he's given his clarity on the position. Now, we need to realize clearly that these propositions of physics were, pre-printing press and what they called the Enlightenment in the 1600s, pre-industrial revolution, pre-discovery of coal. Even we need to put them into proper perspective. But the thing we can draw from them is the intellectual virtue, the prowess with which the Rambam dealt with such propositions. So, we're on the seventh proposition. If you're following along on page 4,565 of the Kindle edition, we're at the 40% mark. The book is a huge voluminous work. It shows on Kindle as 11,467 pages, but I wanted to tackle the whole thing because, like I said, I've gone through this a couple of times in the past and only made it 3/4 through. So it's just that big of a work. And so, we've been doing well with these readings, burning through books in a matter of days. I thought, we need a bigger volume work. And, this is considered number one in Jewish philosophy. So, we may as well tackle it. So let's dive right into it for today and see if we can cover some good ground. We're on the seventh proposition. Now, the absence of a property is itself a property that exists in the body, a something superadded to its substance, an actual accident which is constantly renewed. As soon as it is destroyed, it is reproduced. The reason why they hold this opinion is this: they do not understand that rest is the absence of motion, death the absence of life, that blindness is the absence of sight, and that all similar negative properties are the absence of the positive correlatives. The relation between motion and rest is, according to their theory, the same as the relation between heat and cold, namely, as heat and cold are two accidents found in two objects which have the properties of heat and cold, so motion is an accident created in the thing which moves, and rest an accident created in the thing which rests. It does not remain in existence during two consecutive time atoms. I don't know where they got that notion. As we have stated in the treating of the previous proposition, accordingly, when a body is at rest, Hashem has created the rest in each atom of that body, and so long as the body remains at rest, Hashem continually renews that property. The same, they believe, is the case with man's wisdom and ignorance. The latter is considered by them as an actual accident, which is the subject to the constant changes of destruction and creation. So long as there remains a thing of which such a man is ignorant, death and life are likewise accidents. And as the Muslims distinctly state, life is constantly destroyed and renewed during the whole existence of a living being. And we've realized, that's the state. I mean, our cells reproduce. When Hashem decreed its death, he creates in it the accident of death after the accident of life, which does not continue during two time atoms, as ceased to exist. All this they state clearly. The logical consequences of this proposition is that the accident of death created by God instantly ceases to exist and is replaced by another death, which again is created by God. Otherwise, death could not continue. Death is thus continually created in the same manner as life is renewed every moment. But I should wish to know how long God continues to create death in a dead body. Does he do so whilst the form remains, or whilst one of the atoms exists? Now, we understand decay different in this day and age. For in each of the atoms of the body, the accident of death which God creates is produced, and we know it starts a cascade. And there to be found teeth of persons who died thousands of years ago. We see that those teeth have not been deprived of existence, and therefore the accidents of death has during all these thousands of years been renewed. And according to the opinion prevailing amongst those theorists, death was continually replaced by death. Some of the Mutazila hold that there are cases in which the absence of a physical property is not a real property, that weariness is the absence of strength, and ignorance the absence of knowledge. But this cannot be said in every case of negative properties. It cannot be said that darkness is the mere absence of light, or that rest is the absence of motion. Some negative properties are thus considered by them as having a real existence, while other negative properties are considered as non-existing, just as suits their belief. And that's what happens with tunnel vision. And people come up with notions that suit their belief. Here they have proceeded in the same manner as they proceeded respecting the duration of accidents, and they contend that some accidents exist a long time and other accidents do not last two time atoms. Their sole object is to fashion the universe according to their particular opinions. And that's what tunnel vision does. It paints the target around the arrow it shoots first. And true intellectual virtue has the honesty of knowing the order, doesn't adopt beliefs. Shalom, Ashley G, Toma, and Sheila, welcome. And beliefs. The eighth proposition. There exists nothing but substance and accident, and the physical form of things belong to the class of accidents. It is the object of this proposition to show that all bodies are composed of similar atoms, as we have pointed out in explaining the first proposition. The difference of bodies from each other is caused by the accidents and by nothing else. Animality, humanity, sensibility, and speech are denoted as accidents like blackness, whiteness, bitterness, and sweetness, and the difference between the two individuals of two classes is the same as the difference of two individuals of the same class. Also, the body of the heaven, the body of the angels, the body of the divine throne, such as it is assumed to be the body of anything creeping on the earth, and the body of any plant, have one and the same substance. They only differ in the peculiarity of the accidents and in nothing else. The substance of all things is made up of equal atoms. In other words, I think, he's trying to talk about the structure of existence. Ninth proposition, none of the accidents form the substratum of another accident. It cannot be said this is an accident to a thing which itself is itself an accident to a substance. All accidents are directly connected with the substance. The Muslims deny the indirect relation of the accident to the substance, because if such a relation were assumed, it would follow that the second accident could only exist in the substance after another accident had preceded it, a conclusion to which they would object even with regard to some special accidents. This was long before the periodic table was formed, so keep that in mind. They prefer to show that these accidents can exist in every possible substance, although such substance is not determined by any other accidents, for they hold that all the accidents collectively determine a thing. They advance also another proof in support of this proposition, namely, the substratum, which is the bearer of certain attributes, must continue to exist for a certain time. However, then could the accident, which, according to their opinion, does not remain in existence for 2 moments, become the substratum of something else? 10th proposition. This proposition concerns the theory of admissibility, which is mentioned by the Muslims and forms the principal support of their doctrine. mark its purport. They observe that everything conceived by the imagination is admitted by the intellect as possible. Example, that the terrestrial globe should become the all encompassing sphere, or that this sphere should become the terrestrial globe. Reason does not find here an impossibility, or that the sphere of fire should move towards the center and the sphere of the earth towards the circumference. Human intellect does not perceive any reason why a body should be in a certain place instead of being in another. In the same manner, they say that reason admits the possibility that an existing being should be larger or smaller than it really is, or that it should be different in form and position from what it really is. Example, a man might have the height of a mountain, might have several heads and fly in the air, or an elephant might be as small as an insect, or an insect as huge as an elephant. This method of admitting possibilities is applied to the whole universe. Whenever they affirm that a thing belongs to this class of admitted possibilities, they say that it can have this form and that it is also possible that it be found differently, and that one form is not more possible than the other, but they do not ask whether the reality confirms their assumptions. They say that the thing which exists with certain constant and permanent forms, dimensions, and properties only follows the direction of habit, just as the king generally rides on horseback through the streets of the city and is never found departing from this habit. But reason does not find it impossible that he should walk on foot through the palace. There is no doubt that he may do so, and this possibility is fully admitted by the intellect. Similarly, earth moves towards the center, fire turns away from the center, fire causes heat, water causes cold in accordance with a certain habit, but it is logically not impossible that a deviation from this habit should occur, namely that fire should cause cold, move downward, and still be fire, that the water should cause heat, move upward, and still be water. On this foundation, their whole fabric is constructed. They admit, however, the impossibility of two opposite properties coexisting at the same time in one substance. This is impossible. Reason would not admit this possibility. Again, reason does not admit the possibility of a substance existing without an accident, or an accident existing without a substance. In other words, when they say accident, they're talking about a cause, a trigger, some interacting medium. A possibility admitted by some of the Muslims is it is also impossible that the substance should become an accident, that an accident should become a substance, or that one substance should penetrate another. They admit that reason rejects all these things as impossible. It is perfectly true. They didn't understand chemistry perfectly back then. It is perfectly true that no notion whatever can be formed of those things which they described as impossible. Whilst the notion can be formed of those things which they considered as possible, the philosophers object to this method and say you call a thing impossible because it cannot be imagined, or possible because it can be imagined, and thus you consider as possible that which is found possible by imagination, not by the intellect. Consequently, you determine that a thing is necessary, possible, or impossible in some instances by the aid of the imagination, not by the intellect, and in other instances by the ordinary common sense, as Abu Nasr says in speaking of that which they call intellect. It is clear that they describe as possible that which can be imagined, whether the reality corresponds to it or not, and as impossible that which cannot be imagined. This proposition can only be established by the 9 aforementioned propositions, and no doubt these were exclusively required for the support of this proposition. This you will see when I shall show and explain to you some important parts of this theory, which I shall now introduce in the form of a discussion supposed to have taken place between a mutakallim and a philosopher. The mutakallim said to the philosopher, "What is the reason that we find the substance of iron extremely hard and strong, with a dark color, the substance of cream, on the other hand, extremely soft and white?" The philosopher replied as follows: "All physical bodies have two kinds of accidents, those which concern their substance, as example, the health and the illness of a man, and those which concern their form, example, the astonishment of laughter of a man. The substance of compound bodies differ very much in their ultimate form according to the difference of their forms peculiar to each component substance. Hence, the substance of iron has become in its properties the opposite of the substance of cream, and this difference is attended by the difference of accidents. You notice, therefore, hardness in the one and softness in the other, two accidents whose difference results from the difference which exists in the forms of the substances, while the darkness and the whiteness are accidents whose divergence corresponds to that of two substances in their ultimate condition. The Mutakallim refuted this reply by means of his propositions, as I am now going to state. There does not exist a form which, as you believe, modifies the substance and thus causes substances to be different from each other. This difference is exclusively affected by the accidents, according to the theory of the Kalam, which we mention in thus explaining the eighth proposition. He then continued thus: there is no difference between the substance of iron and that of cream. Whew. All things are composed of the same kind of atoms. We explained the view of the Mutakallimim on this point in treating of the first proposition, the logical consequences of which are, as we have shown, the second and the third propositions. They further require the 12th proposition in order to establish the theory of atoms, nor do they admit that any accidents determine the nature of a substance or predispose it to receive certain other accidents, which we know today, with the four fundamental forces of nature. When you get electromagnetism in the mix with gravity, you have the binding of molecules, and you even learn to split the atom today. Okay, according to their opinion, an accident cannot be the substratum of another accident, as we have shown in explaining the ninth proposition, nor can it have any duration according to the sixth proposition. When the Mutakallimim have established all that they wish to infer from these propositions, they arrive at the conclusion that the component atoms of cream and of iron are alike. The relation of each atom to each of the accidents is the same. One atom is not more adapted than the other to receive a certain accident, which we know chemically, with the periodic table, certain things bind and certain things do not. And as certain atoms is not more fitted to move than to rest, so one atom is not more apt than another to receive the accident of life, of reason, of sensation. It is here of no moment whether a thing contains a larger or smaller quantity of atoms, for according to the view of the Mutakallimim, which we explained in treating of the fifth proposition, every accident of a thing exists in each of its atoms. All of these propositions lead to the conclusion that a human being is not better constituted to become wise than a bat, and establish the theory of admissibility expressed in this 10th proposition. Every effort was made to demonstrate this proposition because it is the best means for proving anything they like, as will be explained. Note, mark, O reader, that if you know the nature of the soul and its properties, and if you have a correct notion of everything which concerns the soul, you will observe that most animals possess imagination. As to the higher class of animals, that is, those which have a heart, it is obvious that they have imagination. Man's distinction does not consist in the possession of imagination, and the action of the imagination is not the same as the action of the intellect, but the reverse of it. For the intellect analysis and divides the component parts of things. It forms abstract ideas of them, represents them in their true form as well as their causal relations, derives from one object a great many facts, which for the intellect totally differ from each other, just as two human individuals appear different to the imagination. It distinguishes that which is the property of the genus from that which is particular to the individual, and no proof is correct unless founded on the former. The intellect further determines whether certain qualities of a thing are essential or non-essential. Imagination has none of these functions. It only perceives the individual, the compound in that aggregate condition in which it presents itself to the senses. Or it combines things which exist separately, joins some of them together, and represents them as one body or as a force of the body. Hence, it is that some imagine a man with a horse's head with wings, etc. This is called a fiction, a phantasm. It is a thing to which nothing in the actual world corresponds, nor can imagination in any way obtain a purely immaterial image of an object. However abstract the form of the image may be, imagination yields, therefore, no test for the reality of a thing. And that's something to keep in mind. You know, this is where people go wrong in imagination. And yeah, if you can't validate it, and yet you've seen groups and religions that have just, you know, wild, fanciful imaginations on so many matters. Here, what profit we derive from the preliminary disciplines and how excellent the propositions are which we learn through them. Know that there are certain things which would appear impossible if tested by man's imagination, being as inconceivable as they coexist of two opposite properties in one object, yet the existence of those same things which cannot be represented by imagination is nevertheless established by proof and attested by their reality. Example: imagine a large globe of any magnitude you like, even as large as the all-encompassing sphere. Further, an axis passing through the center and two persons standing on the two extremities of the axis in such a manner that their feet are in the same straight line with the axis, which may be either in the plane of the horizon or not. In the first case, both persons would fall. In the second case, one, namely the one who stands on the lower extremity, would fall. The other would remain standing. As far as our imagination can perceive, it has, however, already been proved that the earth has the form of a globe, that it is inhabited on both extremities of a certain diameter, that both the inhabitants have their heads towards the heavens and their legs toward each other, and yet neither can possibly fall, nor can it be imagined. You got to remember that was before Newton's discovery of gravity. For it is incorrect to say that the one extremity is above, the other below, but the term above and below apply to both of them as regards to their positive position to each other. Similarly, it has been proved in the second chapter of the book on conic sections that two lines which at first are at a certain distance from each other may approach each other in the same proportion as they are produced further, and yet would never meet, even if they were produced to infinity, although they are observed to be constantly converging. This is a fact which cannot easily be conceived and which does not come within the scope of imagination. Of these two lines, the one is straight, the other is curved, as stated in the aforementioned book. It has consequently been proved that things which cannot be perceived or imagined and which would be found impossible if tested solely by imagination are nonetheless in real existence. The non-existence of things which are represented by imagination as possible has likewise been established by proof. Example, the corporeality of Hashem and his existence as a force residing in a body. Imagination perceives nothing except bodies or properties inherent in bodies. It has thus been clearly shown that in man exists a certain faculty which is entirely distinct from imagination, and by which the necessary, the possible, and the impossible can be distinguished from each other. This inquiry is most useful. It is of the greatest profit to him who desires to guard himself against the errors of men guided by imagination. Important. Do not think that the Mutakalamim ignore this altogether. To some extent, they do take it into consideration. They know it and call that which can be imagined without having reality, as example, the corporeality of Hashem, a phantom and a fancy. They state frequently that such phantoms are not real. It is for this reason that they advance the first 9 propositions and establish them on the proof of the 10th, according to which all those imaginable things which they wish to admit are possible are really possible because of the similarity of all atoms and the equality of all accidents as regards their accidentiality, as we have explained. Consider, O reader, and bear in mind that this requires deep research. For there are certain notions which some believe to be founded on reason, while others regard them as mere fictions. There's usually a catalyst um, that makes something reasonable or fictitious, and learning what that is helps one achieve intellectual virtue. In such cases, it would be necessary to find something that could show the difference between conceptions of the intellect and mere imaginary fancies. When the philosopher, in his way of expressing himself, contends, reality is my evidence, by its guidance I examine whether a thing is necessary, possible, or impossible, a religionist replies, this is exactly the difference between us. That which actually exists has, according to my view, been produced by the will of the Creator, not by necessity. Just as it has been created with a special property, it might have been created with any other property, unless the impossibility which you postulate be proved by a logical demonstration. And especially, I read this twice when I was still in Christianity, but I found the method with which the Rambam employs the intellectual virtue, it was helpful in noting the sheer fact of where their arguments were always in the realm of the unfalsifiable. The difference between something being, in order for a scientific theory today to be accepted as possible, it has to dwell in the realm of falsifiable. In other words, you have to be able to verify or disprove it. And if it's not falsifiable, if it's unfalsifiable, they reject it outright. In other words, there's no way to validate. It's considered a false notion. And I found often that the debates and arguments I was having with a lot of former Christian colleagues was they always ran to instantly a statement or a position that there's no way you could falsify it. They'll talk about things in heaven, they'll talk about concepts, but nothing will be stated that you could measure, that you could validate, that you could test. Talk about the afterlife. Nobody's come back to tell us for certain. Anyways, about this admissibility of imaginable things, I'll have to say more, and I shall return to it in various parts of this treatise, for it is not a subject which should be rejected in haste and on the spur of the moment. In other words, there is some usefulness, as we'll see, to creativity. Imagination is a gift from Hashem, to be used for proper creative purposes. And this is how you can create and help make your life a better, more fulfilled life in this world and make the world a better place. You got to start out by painting that image and then putting it into practice. The 11th proposition: the existence of the infinite is in every respect impossible. The following is an explanation of this proposition. The impossibility of the existence of an infinite body has been clearly demonstrated. The same can be said of an infinite number of bodies, though each of them be finite. If these beings infinite in number exist at the same time equally impossible is the existence of an infinite series of causes, namely that a certain thing should be the cause of another thing, but itself the effect of another cause, which again is the result of another cause, and so on and to infinity, or that things in an infinite series, either bodies or ideals, should be in actual existence and in causal relation to each other. This is a very, very, very key point, especially when people today think of theoretical physics, and one of the theories stumbled on in the last 20 years or so was the multiverse theory. And the sad thing is that they hold that, parallel universes exist, infinitely, in potentia, and that's contrary to what the Rambam's saying here. Um, and after honestly discussing with several rabbis about creation, there are in fact certain things prior to the beginning that we are kind of prohibited from probing into, and Hashem has made that clear. And rabbis have brought that up to me a couple of times. You can't even think on things that prior to that, because you're peering into things that have to do with Hashem's essence. But his point here on the existence of infinite is impossible when it comes to matter. You cannot have an infinite number of stars. They are measurable, and scientists bore this out with the background radiation of the universe. Yeah, they are. It's finite. We've discovered that the universe is finite but expanding, and there was a time where people just imagined it was infinite. But the logic, even from the Rambam over 800 years ago, was that it's not possible, because you would have infinite soup, infinite this, infinite that, infinite collisions, and the observations would be visible at a certain point. So this causal relation is the essential order of nature, in which, as has been fully proved, the infinite is impossible. Has to do with matter. So keep that in mind, folks. As regards the virtual and accidental existence of the infinite, it has been established in some cases, it has been proved. Example, that a body can virtually be divided ad infinitum. Also, that time can be divided ad infinitum. In other cases, it is still an open question. Example, the existence of the infinite in succession. And this really comes down to, there was an article in the 90s about how big the coast of England was. How big was it? And the truth was, and I put this to the test when I was doing my measurements for my fingerprints of the flood film. The truth was, they said it was infinite, and the reality is, when you try to measure a diameter, the smoothness has to come into play. But the coastline of an island was jagged, right? So the closer you zoomed, the more jagged you got, and you had to account for every jagged edge as you went around. So the more you zoomed in, the more the larger and longer that area got, right? So they said it was infinite in the sense that the more you zoomed in, and this is what's led to what's the Mandelbrot equation. If you understand fractals and iterations in fractals, and the way self-replicating systems work, based on fractal geometry. But yeah, you just because you can divide slice time infinitely, or slice something thinner and thinner and thinner, it doesn't mean that infinity exists. But this is what we find with the Large Hadron Collider, being sold as, for atomic research, and they magnetically charge and try to spin the particles to get them moving close to the speed of light, and collide them and see the separation of atoms, and try to understand the properties of their motion and back it up to understand their composition. They make these larger colliders to be able to look at it closer and closer, but they're really chasing that infinite. Uh, and there's no reason to think that um, the larger that they enhance, that it's not going to split more, meaning, yeah, they can find that subatomic particles exist, but if you were to make it 10 times the size, move at faster speed, they'd probably only find that even more subatomic particles exist, and this is the way fractal geometry works. You've got iterations of the same thing, no matter how far you magnify into it. And when you think of creation in, say, check it out online sometime. You can find there's some videos out there that show 3D fractals. Check that out, 3D fractals, and you'll see it almost is like nature. And when iterations are continued over a time span, it starts to look like plant growth and all kinds of stuff. And same with mountain ranges. I mean, yeah, they're just typed in at about 2.7, 2.68D, not 3 dimensions, but this is the way CG artwork in 3D software developed. They studied and started to realize that you could dial in brushes that allowed for mountains and all kinds of stuff in full 3D that are very, very, very realistic so we're seeing a lot of algorithmic growth that allows us to understand some of these things. Okay, but those who boast that they have proved the eternity of the universe say that time is infinite, an assertion which is not necessarily erroneous, for only when one atom has ceased to exist, the other follows, nor is it absolutely wrong when they assert that the accidents of the substance succeed each other in an infinite series, for these accidents do not coexist but come in succession one after another, and the impossibility of the infinite in that case has not been proved. The Mutakalamim, however, make no difference between the existence of an infinite body and the divisibility of a body or of time ad infinitum. Between the coexistence of an infinite number of things as the individual human beings who exist at present and the infinite number of beings successively existing. And I think in our day and age, we're starting to see the reality of the finite. We live on Earth that, if you go back just 120 years ago, is when the Earth passed the 1 billion mark, and now we're nearing the 8 billion mark. And the doubling rate at which population has been growing, there is not infinite resources. And I mean, if it takes 20 years for a city to double in size, you got to think about this. You need to double its water treatment facilities. You need to double its road capabilities. You need to double the housing capabilities. You need to double the infrastructure for food and all kinds of stuff. We've come to the point where we as humanity have to face the limits of a finite world, and there's been too many wars over oil and things of that nature. The point being that there are limited resources, and that mindset of the infinite has caused a lot of wars. They think you're withholding something when in reality, there's a limited amount of it, and we have to learn to manage the earth in a lot more responsible manner. And this is why you have a lot of climate control stuff and things of this nature in this day and age, because things are becoming a problem. And you can't infinitely pollute the world and expect to have a habitable place. It's a finite planet, and seems to be getting smaller every day, especially with the internet we've saw. Okay, Reuben, the son of Jacob, and Jacob, the son of Isaac, and Isaac, the son of Abraham, and so on to infinity. This is, according to their opinion, as inadmissible as the first case. They believe that these four forms of the infinite to be quite equal. Some of the Mutakalimim endeavor to establish their proposition concerning the last named form of the infinite and to demonstrate its impossibility by a method which I shall explain in this treatise. Others say that this impossibility is self-evident axiom and requires no further proof. But if it were undoubtedly wrong to assume that an infinite number of things can exist in succession, although that link of a series which exists at present is finite, the inadmissibility of the eternity of the universe would be equally self-evident and would not require for its proof any other proposition. This, however, is not the place for investigating the subject. So I think he's just trying to give us the thought of the impossibility of infinity and to accept that as a reality. But we know Hashem is outside of creation and is infinite. He is the Almighty, and never lose sight of that. 12th proposition. The senses are not always to be trusted. What a statement. For two reasons, the Mutakalimim find fault with the perception of the senses. First, the senses are precluded from perceiving many objects, either on account of the smallness of the objects, this is the case as with atoms, as we've already stated, or on account of the remoteness of the objects from the person who desires to perceive them. Example, we cannot see, hear, or smell at a distance of many miles, nor do we perceive the motion of the heavens. Secondly, the senses misapprehend the objects of their perception. A large object appears small from a distance, and a small object immersed in water appears larger. A crooked thing appears straight when partly placed in water and partly out of it. Things appear yellow to a person suffering from jaundice. Sweet things are bitter to him whose tongue has imbibed red gall. And they mention many other things of this kind. Therefore, they say, we cannot trust our senses so far as to establish any proof of their perceptions. You must not believe that the Mutakalimim had no purpose in agreeing upon this proposition, or as most of the latter adherents of that school affirm, that the first Mutakalimim had no ulterior object in endeavoring to prove the existence of atoms. On the contrary, every proposition here mentioned is indispensable. If one of these be rejected, the whole theory falls to the ground. The last mentioned proposition is of particular importance, for when our senses perceive things by which any of the foregoing propositions are confuted, the Muslims say that no notice should be taken of the perception of the senses so long as the proposition is supported by the testimony of the intellect and established, as they believe, by proof. Thus, they say that the continuous motion is interrupted by moments of rest, that the millstone in its motion is broken into atoms, that the white color of a garment ceases to exist and another whiteness comes in its stead. All these theories are contrary to what the eye perceives, and many inferences are drawn from the assumed existence of a vacuum, all of which are contradicted by the senses. The Mutakalimim, however, meet these objections by saying whenever they can do so that the perception of these things is withheld from the senses. In other instances, they maintain that the contradiction has its source in the deceptive character of the senses. You know that this theory is very ancient and was the pride of the sophists, who asserted that they themselves were its authors. This is stated by Galenus in his treatise on natural forces, ancient Greek material, and you know well what he says of those who will not admit the evidence of the senses. Having discussed these propositions, I now proceed to explain the theory of the Mutakalamim concerning the above mentioned four problems. You guys enjoying this? Okay, so we're on chapter 74. In this chapter, we'll be given an outline of the proofs by which the Mutakalamim attempt to demonstrate that the universe is not eternal. You must, of course, not expect that I shall quote their lengthy arguments verbatim. I only intend to give an abstract of each proof to show in what way it helps to establish the theory of the creation ex nihilo, or to confute the eternity of the universe, and briefly to notice their propositions they employed in support of their theory. If you were to read their well-known and voluminous writings, you would not discover any arguments with which they support their view left unnoticed in the present outline. Thanks, Patricia. But you might find their greater copiousness of words combined with more grace and elegance of style. Frequently, they employ rhyme, rhythm, and poetical diction, and sometimes mysterious phrases which perhaps are intended to startle persons listening to their discourse and to deter those who might otherwise criticize them. You would also find many repetitions, questions propounded, and, as they believe, answered, and frequent attacks on those who differ from their opinions. The first argument: some of the Mutakalamim thought that by proving the creation of one thing, they demonstrated the creation ex nihilo in reference to the entire universe. And I remember arguing with a lot of instant literal creationists, and the illogical points they would come up, like they'd go on about the complexity of the eye, and that it's too complex, that it had to be created wholly. So they rely solely on the complexity of something to say that demands, a checkbox for the, ex nihilo. Instant literalists don't realize where they put the tick-tock of a clock over Hashem and say, boom, like a genie goes poof. 1 minute it wasn't there, next minute it was. And they apply that change of time over Hashem, and they fail to realize where they're doing it. And I remember arguing to death with a lot of young earth instant literalists. Zayd, who form a small molecule, had gradually been brought to a state of perfection, has undoubtedly not affected this change in development by his own efforts, but owes it to an external agency. It is therefore clear that an agent is required for such organization and successive transmutation. A palm tree or any other object might equally be selected to illustrate this idea. The whole universe, they argue, is analogous to these instances. Thus, you see how they believe that a law discovered in one thing may equally be applied to everything, and that's not always true. The second argument is likewise based on the belief that the proof by which the creation of one thing is demonstrated holds good for the creation ex nihilo in reference to the whole universe. Example: a certain individual called Zed, who one time was not yet in existence, subsequently came into existence, and if it be assumed that Amr, his father, was the cause of his existence, Amr himself must likewise have passed from non-existence into existence. Suppose then that Zed's father questionably owed his origin to Khalid, Zed's grandfather. It would be found that Khalid himself did not exist from eternity, and the series of causes could thus be carried back to infinity. But such an infinite series of beings is inadmissible according to the theory of the Mutakalamim, as we have shown in our discussion on the 11th proposition. In continuing this species of reasoning, you come to a first man who had no parent. Okay, this is logic. He says, viz. Adam. Then you will, of course, ask, whence came this first man? If, example, the reply be given that he was made out of earth, you will again imagine, whence came that earth? Out of water? Whence came the water? The inquiry would be carried on either ad infinitum, which is absurd, or until you meet with something that came into existence from absolute non-existence. In this latter case, you would arrive at the real truth. Here the series of inquiry ends. This result of the question proves, according to the opinion of the Mutakallimim, that the whole universe came into existence from absolute non-existence. I have probed deeply the questions of early Genesis, and at what stage does somebody interject the notion of spirituality, that unmeasurable, unweighable? I've gone as far to tell rabbis that, look, now you're using unequal weights and measures which you're prohibited from. You can't call one thing matter and another spiritual unless it's weighable, unless you can define it, unless it's quantified. And the notion of creation out of nothing, how to balance it, how does science balance? When they use the phrase Big Bang, they don't have anything from prior to that moment. They, boom, all space and matter came into existence. I don't see that as inconsistent with what Torah states. There's no need to add the injection of anything, quote, spiritual. In the beginning, Hashem created the heavens and the earth. And then when it says, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, its focal point is a question, the earth. So now he's discussing from the vantage point of the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And that term deep does not mean water. It means transitory motion like water, but could mean molten rock. And then God said, let there be light. Boom. And there was light. There was no delay, because it makes that phrase, and there was. Clearly, I see that in the evidence based on a soft collision between the earth and the moon, and it says, and God divided the light from the darkness, and that has to do with the celestial orbit. And I still get rabbis that want to argue, but the sun and the moon weren't, and the stars weren't created till the fourth day. And I said, it's not there in the text. The only thing the text says is that generally is that they appeared on that day. And that happened after a couple other stages. The dry land, separating of the dry land from the water, and then the shrubbery, and that would create oxygenation, would eat up carbon-rich atmosphere over a period of time and oxygenate the planet, and that oxygenation would allow for the celestial visibility. And I try to explain that and show that it's tangible in the evidence. And they even have it in their midrash. They have an argument supposedly between the moon and the sun, because they were mentioned as great lights, one to rule the day and one to rule the night. And the moon was disappointed over why it couldn't rule, the day, and therefore Hashem caused it to dwindle. And this we still see today, that the moon is slightly receding. Knowing that there has not been a clear theory on the formation of our planet, there's been a few theories, one of a heavy collision and the swirling of gravity, but there's no model that can account for the matter. But the soft collision between the Earth and the Moon with a retraction would cause, and I think I established it based on the 2010 NASA photos of what was it there on the moon where they did the gravitational anomalies of the moon. The data produced by MIT shows clearly we can back it up and show a collision on the moon of the moon that it boom impacted something at the time of its formation, and I'm of the opinion that the majority of Earth's water came from hydroxyl-rich content. It would only take a layer of about 10 kilometers thick of hydroxyl-rich material, boom, hitting the Earth to become water and turn the Earth into a water-based planet. And I just, see that the succession is there between all the stages of Genesis chapter 1, continually flow logically with the data, that it's correct in ways that the primitive mind doesn't get it. It wants to inject some spiritual non-measurable element, but then I've run into a wall, especially with some rabbis. They have such resistance to the any explanation, and they're usually accounting for other problems. Nonetheless, but my research found that stamping process, which formed the dry land in a certain configuration that inevitably became the flood. If you haven't seen my material, I invite you. If you want a link, I'd be glad to post it. I did a few videos. Anyways, the third argument: the atoms of things are necessarily either joined together or separate, and even the same atoms may at one time be united and another disunited. Now we understand the attractions and the formation and the connective chains between a lot of atoms and what binds them. Like I mentioned, it's the essential iron atom in the heme molecule that binds with oxygen to carry it through the bloodstream in our bodies. It is therefore evident that the nature of the atoms does not necessitate either their combination or their separation. We know with the periodic table that you have atom consistency. There is atomic consistency. Helium is always, one proton, one electron. It's what defines helium as helium. For if they were separate by virtue of their nature, they would never join. And if they were joined by virtue of their nature, they could never again be separated. They, once the periodic table was developed, people start to realize that there is a flow in structure, that only certain combinations combine with other certain combinations, and so on and so forth. But this is the way they thought prior to that. Thus, there is no reason why atoms should rather be combined than separate, or vice versa. Why rather in a state of separation than of combination? Seeing that some atoms are joined, others separate, and again, others subject to change. They being combined at one and separated at another. The fact may therefore be taken as a proof that atoms cannot combine or separate without an agent. This argument, according to the opinion of the Multiverse, establishes the theory that the universe has been created from nothing. You have already been told that those who employ this argument rely on the first proposition of the Multiverse with all its corollaries. Fourth argument: the whole universe is composed of substance and accidents. Every substance must possess one accident or more. And since the accidents are not eternal, the substance of the substratum of the accidents cannot be eternal. For that which is joined to transient things and cannot exist without them is itself transient. Therefore, the whole universe has had a beginning. To the objection that the substance may possibly be eternal, while the accidents, though in themselves transient, succeed each other in an infinite series, they reply that in this case, an infinite number of transient things would be in existence, an eventuality which, according to their theory, is impossible. This argument is considered by them the best and safest and has been accepted by many of them as a strict proof. Its acceptance implies the admission of the following three propositions, the object of which is well understood by philosophers. One, an infinite series of things of which the one succeeds when the other has ceased to exist is impossible. Two, all accidents have a beginning. Our opponent, who defends the theory of the eternity of the universe, can refute this proposition by pointing to one particular accident, namely to the circular motion of a sphere. For it is held by Aristotle that the circular motion is eternal, and therefore the spheres which perform this motion are, according to his opinion, likewise eternal. It is of no use to prove that all other accidents have a beginning, for our opponent does not deny this. He says that accidents may supervene an object which has existed from eternity and may follow each other in rotation. He contends himself with maintaining that this particular accident, circular motion, the motion of the heavenly sphere, is eternal and does not belong to the class of transient accidents. It is therefore necessary to examine this accident by itself and to prove that it is not eternal. Yes, this is long before they understood gravity for sure. The next proposition, which the author of this argument accepts, is as follows. Every material object consists of substance and accidents. That is to say, of atoms and accidents in the sense in which the Mutakallimin used the term. But if a material object were held to be a combination of matter and form, as has been proved by our opponent, it would be necessary to demonstrate that the primal matter and the primal form are transient, and only then the proof of the creation ex nihilo would be complete. The fifth argument. This argument is based on the theory of determination and is made much of by the Mutakallimin. And so I am more deterministic when it comes to Hashem's sovereignty, accepting that he controls each and every variable of all existence over all time. He knows about it all at once and has set in motion that which he knows will fulfill, and his word doesn't return to him void. It returns back to him that which he set it out to do, and mirrors and reflects whatever it has to get to where it's got to go. Okay. It is the same as the theory which I explained in discussing the 10th proposition, namely, when they treat either of the universe in general or any of its parts, they assume that it can have such properties and such dimensions as it actually has, that it may receive such accidents as in reality are noticed in it, and that it may exist in such a place and at such a time as in fact is the case, but it may be larger or smaller, may receive other properties and accidents and come into existence at an earlier or later period or in a different place. Consequently, the fact that a thing has been determined in its composition, size, place, accident, and time, a variation in all these points being possible, is a proof that a being exists which freely chooses and determines these drivers, relations, and circumstances that the universe or a part of it requires a being to be able to make this selection, proves that the universe has been created ex nihilo, for there is no difference which of the following expressions is used: to determine, to make, to create. And this I find to be a profound thought. Okay, there is no difference which of the following expressions is used: to determine, to make, to create, to produce, to originate, or to intend. These verbs have all one and the same meaning. The Mutakallimin give a great many examples, both of a general and special character. They say it is not more natural for Earth to be underwater than to be above water. Who then determined its actual position? Or is it more natural that the sun is round than that it should be square or triangular? For all qualities have the same relation to a body capable of possessing them. Who then determined one particular quality? In a similar way, they treat of every individual being. When, example, they notice flowers of different colors, they are unable to explain the phenomenon, and they take it as a strong proof in favor of their theory. They say, behold, the earth is everywhere alike, the water is alike, and then is the flower red. Why then is the flower red and that one yellow? Some being must have determined the color of each, and that being is God. A being must therefore exist which determines everything, both as regards the universe generally and each of its parts individually. All this logical consequence, all this is the logical consequence of the 10th proposition. And a lot of these notions set me on a real determinism taken strictly. It becomes very stoic in the sense that it becomes too rigid, and it starts to take away your own free will. This is the way a lot of people delude themselves into thinking they cannot succeed. The world's against them, and they get that pity poor attitude. And the reality is the freedom of the will, understanding the balance of the foreknowledge of God, and his determination, versus what the gift of free will is, and its creative purposes and its responsibility. So you really need to think of free will in a sense of responsibility. What do I have to do, and why do I have to do it? And do it because it is the right thing to do. And this is what I find most from the RAMBAM. He teaches us to do what is right because it is right. So when you know something has to go in a certain place, you put it in that place, and that's what makes the world a better place. Whereas if you get too deterministic and just think, yes, in Him we live and move and have our being, but the greatness and the love of Hashem is understood in your uniqueness, and your ability to also formulate and create. That is a gift from Him, and then you become responsible for those faculties that He has in fact given you, to do something with them. And this is what the whole notion of answering after our days here on earth is all about. What did you do? Did you study Torah? And the sheer notion of accountability and responsibility is relative to ability. So think. I believe that the rabbis are very clear that in the eternal state, there isn't any free will. You don't have free will because everybody will know the complete and utter sovereignty of Hashem. But that state still comes with relationship, in the sense of mutual honor and respect. Be in awe of Hashem, but we are not robots. You'll find sin tends to thrive in an environment where actions are done by robotically. You actually have to exercise your free will to stay away from sin. If you start functioning by rote, just moving, doing routine, that tends to foster the environment for sin more than it does for soundness. But creating a fixed time to study is a good thing. Anyways, the theory of determination is moreover adopted by some of those who assume the eternity of the universe, as will be explained below. In conclusion, I consider this to be the best argument, and in another part I shall more fully acquaint you with the opinion I have formed concerning the theory of determination. Yeah, I look at it, Ashley. I like the holographic principle in the sense that there's a lot of if you consider it like a video game, parameters are defined that the player can move within a video game, but you still can't run up walls and run through objects. In the parameters are designed into the game, and so determination uh, with Hashem, there are just things that you cannot do, and coming to terms with your limits based on true intellectual virtue will allow one to be equipped to thrive with what you can do. Don't focus on what you can't do, but knowing the rules of a game allow you to function thorough. And I did reach out to somebody in Jerusalem, and I wanted to start a series called Paradigm Shift that talked about preparedness for Mashiach and the atmosphere and the notions all surrounding that. And I'm waiting to hear back because I think it's something that would be a very interesting conversation, to have people in that mindset of what their function would be like and should be like, and to be prepared for such. The sixth argument. One of the modern Mutakalamim thought that he had found a very good argument, much better than the advanced hitherto, namely the argument based on the triumph of existence over non-existence. He says that according to the common belief, the existence of the universe is merely possible, for if it were necessary, the universe would be Hashem. But he seems to forget that we are at issue with those who, whilst they believe in the existence of God, admit at the same time the eternity of the universe. The expression "a thing is possible" denotes that the thing may either be in existence or not in existence, and that there is not more reason why it should exist than why it should not exist. The fact that a thing that the existence of which is possible actually does exist, although it bears the same relation to the state of existence as to that of non-existence, proves that there is a being which gave the preference to existence over non-existence. This argument is very forcible. It is a modified form of the foregoing argument, which is based on the theory of determination. He only chose the term preference instead of determination, and instead of applying it to the properties of the existing being, he applies it to the existence of the being itself. He either had the intention to mislead, or he misunderstood the proposition that the existence of the universe is possible. Our opponent, who assumes the eternity of the universe, employs the term possible and says the existence of the universe is possible in a sense different from that which the Mutakalamim applies it, as will be explained below. Moreover, it may be doubted whether the conclusion that the universe owes its origin to a being which is able to give preference to existence over non-existence is correct, for we may apply the terms preference and determination to anything capable of receiving either of two properties which are contrary or opposed to each other, and when we find that the thing actually possesses one property and not the other, we are convinced that there exists a determining agent. Example, when you say that a piece of copper could just as well be formed into a kettle as into a lamp, when we find that it is a lamp or a kettle, we have no doubt that a deciding and determining agent had advisedly chosen one of the two possible forms which have just been mentioned. When, however, it is the question whether a certain existing object is eternal, or whether it has passed from non-existence into existence, this argument is inadmissible. For it cannot be asked who decided in favor of the existence of a thing and rejected its non-existence, except when it has been admitted that it has passed from non-existence into existence. In the present case, this is just the point under discussion. If we were to take the existence and the non-existence of a thing as mere objects of imagination, we should have to apply the 10th proposition, which gives prominence to the imagination and fiction, and ignores the thing itself, which exists in reality or are conceived by the intellect. Our opponent, however, who believes in the eternity of the universe, will show that we can imagine the non-existence of the universe as well as we can imagine any other impossibility. It is not my intention to refute their doctrine of the creation ex nihilo. I only wish to show the incorrectness of their belief that this argument differs from the one which precedes, since in fact, the two arguments are identical and founded on the well-known principle of determination. And I think in our day and age, we'd use the phrase determinism, stoic thinking. And I find it more miraculous to imagine that Hashem controlled each and every variable of all existence from the dawn of time to come to the formation of an event mentioned as miraculous in the Torah than for the notion of a poof genie that changes the rules of nature, changes the name of the game, on a whim. I always held that the term miracle doesn't mean unexplainable. It just means something that is supernatural or outside of the usual norms of nature. And we find today in our day and age with physics has crossed that line. When you're dealing with the quantum nature of things, they get into arguments like supersymmetry, which of course was disproven, but they have statements over and over that use the word super, like superconductivity, but they will not use the phrase supernatural. But they still can't explain why certain things are superconductive, and it's just discovery of certain minerals that allow them to discover the properties of superconductivity, but that means it defies the typical rules of nature, but they won't call it supernatural. And so I hold that there are upper dimensional physics that do exist that you could call super physics, but academia has a problem with it because it explains too much of the supernatural and opens up the possibility for so much that they don't want to admit. So the seventh argument: one of the modern Mutakalamim say that he is able to prove the creation of the universe from the theory put forth by the philosophers concerning the immortality of the soul. He argues thus: if the world were eternal, the number of the dead would necessarily be infinite, and consequently an infinite number of souls would coexist. But it has long since been shown that the coexistence of an infinite number of things is positively impossible. This is indeed a strange argument. One difficulty is explained by another, which is still greater. Here, the saying, well known among the Arameans, may be applied. Your guarantee wants himself a guarantee. He rests his argument on the immortality of the soul, as though he understood this immortality, in what respect the soul is immortal, or what the thing is which is immortal. If, however, he only meant to controvert the opinion of his opponent, who believed in the eternity of the universe and also in the immortality of the soul, he accomplished his task, provided the opponent admitted the correctness of the idea which the Mutakalam formed of the philosopher's view on the immortality of the soul. Some of the latter philosophers explained this difficulty as follows: the immortal souls are not substance which occupies a locality or a space, and their existence in an infinite number is therefore not possible. You must bear in mind that those abstract beings which are neither bodies nor forces dwelling in bodies, and which in fact are ideals, are altogether incapable of being represented as a plurality unless some ideals be the cause of the existence of others, and can be distinguished from each other by the specific difference that some are the efficient cause and others are the effect, but that which remains of Zed after his death is neither the cause nor the effect of that which is left of Amr, and therefore the souls of all the departed form only one being, as has been explained by Ibn Becker, Ibn al-Zag, and others who ventured to speak on these profound subjects. In short, such intricate disciplines which our mind can scarcely comprehend cannot furnish any principles for the explanation of another subjects. It would be noted that whoever endeavors to prove or disprove the eternity of the universe by these arguments of the Muslims must necessarily rely on one of the two following propositions, or on both of them, namely on the 10th proposition, according to which the actual form of a thing is merely one of many equal possible forms, and which implies that there must be a being capable of making the special selection, or on the 11th proposition, which rejects the existence of an infinite series of things coming successively into existence. The last named proposition is demonstrated in various ways. They advert to a class of transient individuals and to a certain particular date. From the theory which asserts the eternity of the universe, it would follow that the individuals of that class up to that particular date are infinite in number. 1,000 years later, the individuals of that class are likewise infinite in number. The last number must exceed the previous by one by the number of the individuals born in those 1,000 years, and consequently, one infinite number would be larger than another. In other words, you cannot have two lines of infinity and say they vary, is what he's trying to get across. The same argument is applied to the revolutions of the heavenly sphere, and in like manner, it is shown that one infinite number of revolutions would be larger than another. The same result is obtained when revolutions of one sphere are compared with those of another moving more slowly. The revolutions of both spheres, though unequal, would be infinite in number. Similarly, they proceed with all those accidents which are subject to destruction and production. The individual accidents that have passed into non existence are counted and represented as though they were still in existence and as though they were things with a definite beginning. This imaginary number is then either increased or reduced. Yet all these things have no reality and are mere fictions. Yeah, you got to be able to always determine something, for your own sanity. That's fiction. Call a lie a lie. Don't be afraid to grow in intellectual capacity by standing strong. And if you get tested on the matter, um, share your heart, but don't ever be afraid to call a lie a lie. Don't let it impress or impose or encroach upon you, lest it infect you. It's like a virus. You wouldn't want to go walk into a known place filled with toxic radiation. You just wouldn't do it, right? Abu Nazar al-Farabi, in criticizing this proposition, has exposed all its weak points, as you will clearly perceive when you study his book on the changeable beings earnestly and dispassionately. These are the principal arguments of the Mutakallimim in seeking to establish the creation ex nihilo. Having thus proved that the universe is not eternal, they necessarily infer that there is an agent who created it in according with his intention, desire, and will. They then proceed to prove the unity of that agent, as I'm going to point out in the next chapter. All right, and why don't we stop there for today? You guys okay with that? And we'll be back on Monday with chapter 75 on page 4875. Hopefully you folks are getting things out of this, but I mean, I think it really comes down to our view of Hashem. When you think of the greatness and grandness of Hashem, I think there's clear Torah Tanakh positions, when it says he knows of all our days before one of them yet began. we can safely attribute omniscience to Hashem. And just when you consider omniscience and its ramifications across the board, that's where I really get lean towards more deterministic. He's Hashem. I love the notion that we've read earlier that, Hashem is the place of all existence, not that space is the place that we reside in. Hashem is the place. Hashem doesn't reside in space, but Hashem is the actual place. He's the one who allows for space and everything to exist. And hope you're enjoying it. Thanks, Ashley, for the positive comments. Always keeps me inspired. And now I am still scheduled this weekend, I believe, for Pirkei Avos with Rabbi Kaufman. I've already confirmed with Rabbi Poston for Beyond the Seven this weekend after Shabbat in Israel. And we're still on this Sunday for Genesis class with Rabbi Goldberg. So I'm doing that all weekend. But I do have another job interview tomorrow. So keep me in your prayers for that, Hashem willing. I think it might be a reasonable fit in the sense that it shouldn't interrupt with me doing broadcast schedules. But you never know. I mean, you get out there in the real world, I find when you try to serve Hashem, everything in this world tries to put that to the test. And it's like, the only way you get a job is if you're available 24/7 at their whim, and then they want to put it to the test. I just don't want to have conflict. I'd love to see Noahide Broadcasting still continue to grow. I'm still daily working with the programming on the International Noahide Roku channel and many other things, working to try to come up with some newer and fresher stuff. So I'm going to call it a day here for Rocky Mountain Readings, but please come back on Monday, and we're going to continue with Chapter 75 of the Guide for the Perplexed. And if you got any questions, any comments, put it in the chat room. If you reach out and message me, and let's hash this out. It'd be nice to always connect. It's always a joy to get to know you more and to discuss the greatness of Hashem and how, in fact, intellectual virtue can decipher and put into use the knowledge that the RAMBAM is trying to convey. So have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'll see you on Monday here. Bye for now.